Welcome to Hope is Here. My name is Greg Horn. We are continuing our talk about, do I choose fear or faith today? I used to love that movie, The Karate Kid. Still like it, just haven't seen it for several years. But when Mr. Miyagi was teaching Daniel's son, he's wanting to teach him how to use his hands and the karate moves. And of course, Daniel's son was ready to do it right away. And yet Mr. Miyagi said, no. We'll get to teaching you karate moves in a bit. But first, I want you to do this, wax my boat for me. And of course, he's like, what? The young man's like, I want to learn how to make some karate moves. I don't want to wax your boat. And yet, what Mr. Miyagi did is he taught him, and he was such a smart guy, had a lot of wisdom, that he said, I want you to put the wax on with your left hand and then wipe the wax off with your right hand. And he had him go wax on, wax off. Wax on, wax off. And what just came to me when I was studying and preparing a message about choosing fear or faith a few years ago, I thought back to that movie, and each day, just like Daniel's son, wax on, wax off, we have to say, I choose fear or I choose faith. I choose fear or I choose faith. And friends, I'm so thankful that God doesn't treat us like robots. I mean, he can control and we could stand in faith all the time, but what kind of relationship would that be if somebody controlled our thoughts, our actions, our emotions? And that's one of my most favorite things about a follower of Jesus, being a follower of Jesus, is that he gives us a choice. We can either accept him as Lord and Savior, or we can just make him as our Savior. Say, oh, hey, I want to be in heaven one day. I know I can't get there on my own, but man, it is a game changer when you decide to make him the Lord of your life. And I'm so thankful for my mentor and close friend, Greg Williams, for the past 20 years. It's always challenging me on a regular basis about, Greg, make sure that he's more than just your Lord. Your Savior. Make sure that he's the Lord of your life too in every area. And we've talked about this before, and I've got to give credit to Greg on this too about, make sure, Greg, that your vertical relationship is a priority. Because when you do, all those horizontal relationships, okay, that go on in your life, they just go so much better when you have put that vertical relationship, that time with God, looking to heaven and focusing on Jesus as a priority. It's amazing how much better your external circumstances go. And I know you're saying, well, Greg, I've tried that before, and sometimes they don't go perfectly. Well, I guess I would add, maybe your external circumstances might not change necessarily all the time. Sometimes it just doesn't, okay? But your internal circumstances do. Externally, things might not change, but internally, you have peace, you have joy. You're able to have the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control, friends. And that comes out of spending a time with a personal relationship with Jesus and making him not just your Savior, but the Lord of your life. And so we talked yesterday about, let's have a plan, because we've been hanging out in Exodus chapter 14, and they were just giving Moses the business because they said, in verse 11, why did you bring us out here into the wilderness to die? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. Wow. You can feel the heat coming off those three verses there in Exodus chapter 14, verses 10 through 12. We talked about yesterday our natural response when our backs are against the wall to sometimes be afraid, 2, to be sarcastic, and 3, just have that worst case scenario mindset, which you could clearly hear in those 3 verses in Exodus chapter 14, verses 10 through 12 that I just read. But as you go on to look at chapter 14 in verses 13, 14, the next 2 verses there, but Moses told the people, don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today, they will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. And I believe that's a word for somebody listening today. The Lord wants to fight whatever battle it is that you're in right now, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially. He just says, hey, you know what? I got this. I've got this. And we talked about that, sometimes we need to have a better plan when we go through challenging circumstances in our lives. And this doesn't really make sense in the world's eyes, but, maybe let's try the let it go plan. The let it go plan. You hear about all these different diets, the, keto diet, I can't think of the word where you eat for only 8 hours, but out of a day. But there's just different types of diets that people like to try, and liquid diets, and there's just things that people try these different diets, different plans. But sometimes we just need to try the intermittent fasting. That's the word I was looking for, intermittent fasting plan. But, sometimes we just need to try a let it go plan. And part of that is adopting a fear not mentality. We talked about that yesterday. For God did not give us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. Secondly, then we say, I'm gonna stand firm. I'm gonna stand firm. That's what Moses was saying to him. He said, just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. And boy, when we're battling fear and say, I'm going to choose faith today, sometimes we just got to stand firm, like Moses told the people there in verse 13 in Exodus chapter 14. Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. So sometimes we just have to stand firm. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 13 and 14 says, be on your guard, stand in your faith, be courageous, be strong, and do everything in love. Friends, is that how you're handling things today? Are you standing firm in your faith? Are you being courageous? Are you being strong? But while you're doing that, are you still loving people like Jesus did? Even those tough conversations you have to have, especially for those that can be unlovely to you, takes your faith to a whole nother level when you can do that. Third thing is we've got to expect God's help, okay? When we got to get a new plan on how to stand in faith and not fear, we've got to expect God's help. He talked about it there in verse 14. The Lord himself will fight for you today. Just stay calm. And then I love Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5 and 6. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. So we can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. Friends, God wants to help you today. He wants to be invited, though. So I want to encourage you to invite him into whatever problem, whatever area of your life that's really, really challenging right now. As we continue to look at the story there with Moses in Exodus chapter 14, verses 15 through 18, it says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. Divide the water so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they will charge in after the Israelites. My great glory will be displayed through Pharaoh and his troops, his chariots, and his charioteers. When my glory is displayed through them, all of Egypt's going to see my glory and know that I am the Lord. Wow. What a powerful passage there in those 4 verses in Exodus chapter 14, verses 15 through 18. And friends, I want to remind you today that whether it's the coronavirus, whether it's a financial health, emotional or relational challenge, we can be like the Israelites and move on mentally and physically. I mean, sometimes you just got to choose to move on. Say, you know what? That season's over in my life, whatever that is, whether it could be an unexpected divorce, a job loss, okay? We lose things sometimes, and we just, relationships, finances, make unwise financial moves, and we just have to let it go. And not only do we have to move on mentally, sometimes it helps when we move on physically. Okay, it may be in changing the way you drive to work, changing what you eat, changing about what you watch on TV. Okay, there's a lot of things that we can do to move on mentally and physically. And I love that the Lord, God is kind and gracious and loving, but sometimes I love it. He just kind of cuts to the chase and lays it out there. And sometimes it's so blunt, it'll splatter. But you know what? He just said to Moses there in verse 15 in Exodus chapter 14, why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. And maybe today you have been in a season of paralysis by analysis. I love that saying. Somebody said to me one time, because I just kept overanalyzing all the information about the decision I was supposed to make. And I heard Andy Stanley say this several years ago. And at the time, I was like, I don't know. But now I have to say I pretty much agree with him. He said, once you have all the information, there's never a decision that you have 100% certainty on. Or if you do, by then it's too late and the decision opportunity's already passed you by. But when you get to 80%, like this is going to work out, then you need to go and make the decision. As my hero Wayne Smith, founding pastor of Southern Christian, used to say, if you wait to go downtown when all the stoplights turn green, you'll never get there. My hero Wayne Smith. But you know what? The fact of the matter is sometimes, man, we just got to move. We got to go. I had a job at a grocery store. My first job, I had a paper out when I was 14 for a while, but at 15 I started working at Food Town grocery store, and so sometimes it'd be slow up front, and I'd be standing around, and one of my managers would yell from the office, "Hey, Greg, do something, even if it's wrong." Now that's not always good wisdom, okay? But sometimes it is. Okay, especially if you're in a season of paralysis by analysis, and just to move on mentally and physically. Secondly, we got to take action. Sometimes we just have to take action. Verse 16 said, pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. And we got to take action. Maybe God's calling you to take action by moving on mentally and physically. Number 3, know that God is always working behind the scenes. I love that. The Lord said to Moses there in verse 17 in chapter 14 of Exodus, and I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they will charge in after the Israelites. My great glory will be displayed through Pharaoh and his troops, his chariots, and his charioteers. Friends, God is always working behind the scenes in your life. I want to remind you that today and encourage you to stand on his promises and to be patient and wait on God to act. We saw how God worked in Joseph's life, but man, what a journey it was. And I don't have time to go into that. Most of you know the story about Joseph. You remember that. The guy went through a hard time, but eventually, in God's perfect timing, he became the second most powerful man in all the land. And so be patient sometimes and know that God's always working behind the scenes in your life. But as I've said before, I don't think God's in the microwave business. I think God's in the crock pot business. And we all know a meal that comes out of the crock pot, even though we have to wait a lot longer, it tastes so much better. So I encourage you to be patient today. And last but not least, God will get the glory out of every situation in our lives that we stay focused on him and trust in him. In verse 18 there in Exodus chapter 14, it says, when my glory is displayed through them, all of Egypt will see my glory and know that I am the Lord. Friends, I've seen that in my life over and over again. There's been things that only God could have done. One of them's being on this radio program and having it be 5 years in December, and having over 70,000 downloads of the podcast. It's something only God could do. And because of your financial partnership, we so appreciate you being a partner and making Hope is Here possible. So I want to encourage you today to say, you know what? I don't choose fear. I choose faith. I'm Greg Horn, and this is Hope is Here.